Hey, deserving listeners, it's time for me to continue reading your emails regarding the trial. I saved up all of your emails over the past month, and I thought I would read them all. The good ones and the bad ones. Let's get to it. Okay, so listener Pear wrote in and gives a lot of detail here. Lots of different details about the trial, trying to educate me, I guess, which I appreciate. So thanks for that, but I won't detail that because it's long. Then goes on here. In the UK, the judge put extreme weight on Johnny Depp's substance abuse and basically put away his testimony as being non-credible. This is most likely why he was so reluctant to be honest about the extent of his drug use. Okay, yeah, that's interesting. I'd heard that, but I don't think I knew it at the time of talking about those things. But yeah, that would make sense that Johnny Depp would be hesitant about talking about his drug use. I also, at the time, was hypothesizing that he still hasn't really recovered yet and is minimizing because of that. But it's probably more likely that he was trying to strategize regarding the trial. But I think it did hurt his credibility, to me anyway. Ultimately not in the end, obviously, to the jury. But Amber Heard alleged she was abused by her past partner before Johnny Depp, who she was arrested committing domestic violence against. Yeah, I heard that. She also alleged that Elon Musk abused her and was bugging her cars. I didn't know that. And Amber Heard's bloody lip is obviously a chapped lip after pulling off a scab. It's obviously a chapped lip. For bias purposes, I will admit that Johnny Depp was jealous, not to the extent that she claims, but he did not appreciate her having multiple sex scenes, nude scenes, and going to parties on her own, etc. Knowing what we know now, I don't think his jealousy was misplaced. Wait, so what are you saying? I will admit that Johnny Depp was jealous, not to the extent she claims, but he did not appreciate her having multiple sex scenes. She's an actor, so that's going to happen. So him not appreciating it is, that doesn't give him the excuse to be jealous or to attack her or try to control her. I don't know if those things happened, and then he did not appreciate her having nude scenes. Again, she's at work. He did not appreciate her going to parties on her own. She can't go to parties on her own? Knowing what we know now, I don't think his jealousy was misplaced. Maybe I'm misunderstanding what you're saying, but I'll just move on. He certainly did not fit a profile of sexually abusing her. Okay, yeah, I heard a number of people saying this, and although it's kind of true for sure, but that doesn't mean it didn't happen. Plenty of people don't fit the profile and commit these kinds of crimes. Now, is it easy to dismiss her stories of abuse along those lines, given all the testimony and the evidence demonstrating that she likely was lying at times, if not a lot of times? Yeah. Could you dismiss it? Sure. Is there a lot of evidence pointing in another direction, given the fact that he had never had an allegation before and doesn't fit certain quintessential profiles of an abuser, of a sexual abuser? Yeah. But again, that doesn't mean that it doesn't happen. I've treated people who did not fit the profile of someone who abuses someone sexually and did not have a history of it, apparently, and did do those kinds of behaviors. So it doesn't mean that it didn't happen. But could you conclude that you don't think it happens? Yeah. But none of us know if those things happened or not. I just want to be clear. There's no possible way that any of us, outside of Johnny Depp and Amber Heard, could possibly know if her account is true or not about those particular behaviors. There are other things you could point to and be like, it's extremely unlikely. So none of us know. But you could viably conclude that it didn't happen, but none of us know. We just don't. Like, that's just a fact. That's a scientific fact that none of us know. I don't know why I have to say that. It just seems so obvious, right? But I don't want to be defensive. So listen, read the emails. Johnny Depp's drug use was extensive, but none of his medical records suggest he ever went to the extent of delusion, aggressive acts, or couldn't control his anger, etc. Okay, so his drug use was extensive, but none of his medical records suggest he ever... Well, there wouldn't be a medical record because he didn't go to the physician to talk about those kinds of things in all likelihood. But is it possible that he was never delusional? Yeah, I wasn't there, and neither were you. So it was just Amber Heard's account. Could absolutely be a lie. Could have absolutely happened. Who knows? But the fact that there's no medical records doesn't say anything. And it's one of those things that there's enough evidence to suggest that it's possible, given what he was using and the extent that he was using. There's evidence that it didn't happen, and certainly there's a lot of reasons to believe that even if he did have psychosis as a result of the drug use, that he didn't do the kinds of things that Amber Heard was accusing him of. Yeah, it's possible, but yeah, I get your point. There's no medical record. It's a tick in the column. It's one of the hundreds of ticks in the various columns regarding if it happened or not. You go on to say, you get a lot of negative comments, some deserved, and some that are delusional and rude by trolls and triggered individuals. The reason for both are the same. You draw inferences that are not there or are easily refuted by facts in evidence. You misrepresent testimony and evidence that are available for all to see online. Your opinion of the outcome is not based in reality. That's why you get hate, and it is deserved. Wow, that took a turn at the end there. Wow, I mean, ouch. So not only do you know of the attacks, but it's deserved. Yeah, ouch. I don't know. So my opinion is not based in reality, and I deserve the bullying, and I misrepresent testimony. I mean, on its face, yeah, I'm sure I did, because that's not what I'm here to do. Like, there are people out there that know about these kinds of things and have studied it and are experts. I was reacting to the trial. So maybe I should have said that at the beginning of every video. Like, if you're coming here for an accurate representation of the data in this trial, I'll tell you, this isn't the place to watch, because I'm not setting out to do that. That's never been my intention with any of the things that I watch, because how would I know? The only way I could possibly represent the evidence accurately is if, I don't know, I was there or something, or if I was involved in the case somehow. But just watching stuff on YouTube, like, how would we possibly know anything? But yeah, did I make mistakes about the testimony? Yeah, I made numerous mistakes about the testimony. There were so many details to keep track of, and particularly if you're a super fan of it's a weird thing to say, but there are super fans of the Johnny Depp Amber Heard conflict. People that have memorized entire sections, or if not everything, about the trial. And watching me, could that be painful because you know a lot more than me? Yeah, okay. But it means I deserve to be bullied and attacked? I mean, maybe you're right. I don't know. It's demoralizing, honestly. Okay, you knew this was going to happen. All right. Everything's fine. In a couple months, no one will even remember I watched the trial, and it will all be over. Daria from Canada says, I read from a psychologist that borderline personality disorder and histrionic personality disorder are oppressive and outdated diagnoses of women, and no psychologist should ever be working in those terminologies. Can you comment on that? Yeah, they're not outdated. I understand that some people would think of them as outdated, or they don't like them. And there has been a growing movement in our field to change the language in the DSM away from borderline and histrionic personality disorder and more toward the language of spectra. And I appreciate and agree with the premise, but the model that they have proposed, just doesn't resonate with me. I mean, maybe someone would have to really explain it to me somehow to make me fully understand what they're trying to get at. But yeah, has borderline and histrionic been used to oppress people? Yeah, I mean, everything in the DSM has been used to oppress people in really horrific ways. I mean, if you understand the history of my field, there's been atrocities that we have committed as a field, and big and small. And currently, are there people being oppressed and harmed, women in particular, by the labels of borderline and histrionic? Yes, it is happening. I talk with those people frequently as a lightning rod for those kinds of disorders, meaning that they will tell me their stories, and I will try to raise awareness that this is happening. And yeah, absolutely. I will hear from fellow clinicians, people of all genders, by the way, that, oh, I have this client, oh my gosh, she's so borderline. I mean, because she sued her past therapist. Oh my gosh, she's so borderline. Like, I can't wait to get rid of her. And I'm not even joking. Like, that is an accurate representation of the crap that I will hear from fellow clinicians. And when I'm in power, I will come down hard on that. Hard. I'll be nice, but firm. If it's a boss, do I say something? Now I would, but in the past when I didn't have any power and didn't even necessarily know I was right, I don't know if I would say something. I certainly would bite my tongue a lot. If it's a peer and a colleague, I might say something depending on if I feel safe enough. And I probably dropped the ball many times and should have said something but didn't because I didn't know if I should say something. I worried it would come out as condescending to them or something. But anyway, so yes, it's absolutely used to oppress people. It's not outdated because it's literally in the most, recent version of the DSM that just came out this year. And you go on to say, and if a person isn't supposed to be diagnosed with this because it is outdated, then what is the diagnosis instead? Well, again, it's not outdated. I actually have spoken out about this for a long time that I don't like the word histrionic. The label, the word, originated from ancient Greece, meaning uterus, like a hysterectomy. Histrionic, it has the same base because originally 4,000 years ago, even prior to the ancient Greeks in ancient Egypt, there was this notion that when some people, particularly women, had a whole variety of symptoms, I could list all this, it's literally hundreds of symptoms that do not hold together, but lots of different symptoms. I mean, it's 4,000 years ago. Medical science wasn't what it is today, but they would label that whatever the ancient Egyptians called it, but the concept was that the uterus was wandering throughout the body. I'm not even joking. And then the ancient Greeks took some of their medical knowledge from the ancient Egyptians and they adopted that, and then they applied their word for uterus called hysteria or histrionic, right? I mean, it was probably a different sort of conjugation of the word back then. Those ideas were adopted by medicine in Europe, and then eventually by the time psychology and psychotherapy and psychoanalysis came around, we still had this word hysteria. In fact, Freud's first seminal work had to do with hysteria. And over the past 140 years since Freud wrote about it in 1880, we have slowly evolved and morphed and changed. Our current conceptualization of hysteria or histrionic is vastly different than Freud's version back 142 years ago. But it has its roots in that, and we just kept holding on to that word of histrionic. I think partially because it's so old and it comes from Freud. But to call Amber Heard histrionic, like there's something wrong with her uterus, is inherently sexist, right? And hysteria has been used in all sorts of sexist ways throughout our history in our field and the field of medicine. And just even the non-clinical word of hysterical has been used against women. Women who are crying for valid reasons because they're being harmed or oppressed by misogyny or sexism will be labeled as being hysterical. Oh, you're hysterical. And yeah, so I wish we would get away from the word histrionic. There's no reason why we need to hold on to that word. I don't know what word we would replace it with, but something like attention trauma would fit for me. I don't know. Now, the word borderline does make some sense, though, but it's a little harsh because it refers back to the original observations of people with borderline as being borderline psychotic, because people at the upper end of borderline personality disorder are slightly delusional at times. When they're triggered, they will see rejection and betrayals that did not happen, and they will hear things but it's not a hallucination. They're just filtering their experiences through their emotion and coding their memories to fit with their emotion rather than what really happened. We all do this, but people with borderline do it to a greater extent. And so they will believe things that happened, truly believe. You said this to me 5 minutes ago, and you're like, what are you I did not say anything of the sort to you. And they're convinced and they're angry about it. And you could label that delusional, but it's not really a delusion. It's borderline delusional. But borderline delusional as the label focuses on one aspect of the borderline condition that is just a small part. In fact, I would guess that a good sizable percentage of people with borderline don't have those experiences of borderline delusions. So a better word for me would be abandonment trauma personality disorder. It'll never happen, I don't think, in my lifetime anyway. But now, the labels of borderline and histrionic are extremely helpful for experts. For people that actually know what borderline is and know what histrionic is. The history of the label we don't really hear that anymore. We just use the word itself, and it doesn't carry with it that stigma because experts know the stigma and have debunked all of those myths in their mind. So experts of borderline and histrionic do not think of people with borderline and histrionic as bad people or having anything to do with the uterus or having anything to do with gender. So experts, yes, there are many in my field who are not experts in any personality disorder, let alone borderline and histrionic, that still will have a lot of the stigma and still will not know what they're doing and still will have a lot of myths about those disorders. So can one clinician look at other clinicians and go like, we have a problem here, we got to get rid of it? And I'm like, whoa, like, yes, there's a problem, but we need to educate people more. But honestly, if we change the labels, I don't care, because I don't use those labels with my clients anyway, typically. I would frequently use this phrasing in my videos, of all my videos, all my episodes. I don't tend to talk about borderline as borderline. I tend to talk about it as abandonment trauma or betrayal trauma or relational traumas. You'll hear me say that. I'm not saying that as a euphemism. I'm saying that because it's a much more precise label. It's a much more meaningful label. It's much more descriptive, right? Saying someone has borderline, I don't know what people think of borderline. In fact, most people have very negative, wrong points of view about borderline. So I use more precise language because then I can be reassured that people will know what I'm talking about. But if I talk to a fellow expert, I know I can use the word borderline. I know that they will know what I mean because we've previously talked about it, and I know that they're an expert in it. Okay, anonymous patron, she says, some commentators think people might be getting triggered by you because you advocate for the emotional struggles for the person with borderline personality disorder, but they want to hear you advocate for the struggling family members of people with borderline and the struggles for the abuse victims of borderline. How does one cope or survive if you are in a relationship with someone with borderline, particularly if you are the child and it's the parent with borderline? Interesting. I don't think I'd ever considered that, but it makes total sense that people would be triggered by me, because people have been triggered by me in the past around this, because I've been talking about borderline, various different personality disorders, but a lot on borderline for the past 14 years of this podcast. And occasionally people would email in and they would say something like that. They would be like, hey, thanks for providing detailed information about borderline personality disorder, but I feel like you're advocating for compassion for these people, which I guess is good. But what if the person in my life that has borderline was massively abusive to me? Am I supposed to have compassion for them? For the abuser? Are we blaming the victims? And that did not occur to me, which is kind of obvious to think about, right? And so I would do episodes where I would counter that, and I would say, yes, absolutely. People with borderline can abuse other people. People with narcissism can abuse other people, and it can be horrific. It can be awful. It can be some of the worst abuse that you've ever heard about can be committed by someone who has borderline or narcissistic or histrionic for that matter. So yeah, that needs to be said. And I apparently didn't, or I'm guessing I didn't say that enough, and I should have, particularly for the new people watching me. I mean, it just mortifies me to think about new people. And of course, I knew a lot of new people were watching, but it didn't occur to me to say that. I wish I could go back in time and say certain caveats or sprinkle in certain ideas. And I mean, I feel like I did that a lot, right? I would say, well, Johnny Depp could be telling the truth or he could be lying. And I was always trying to get out ahead of certain people thinking I'm saying something when that's not really what I mean. But I don't think I did this enough. And you're probably right, anonymous patron, that I should have said something like, so I'm providing a compassionate, understanding point of view for people with borderline. But I want to be clear, if you have someone in your life that had borderline or has borderline and had or is abusing you, by no means am I saying that they were justified in doing that. And by no means am I saying you're supposed to have compassion for them, because you don't have to have compassion for your abuser if you don't want to. You could hate them your whole life, and that's okay. I'm not saying you're supposed to somehow just not have anger and not draw a distance. And people would even email in and say, my mother is abusive and has been diagnosed with borderline, and from your episodes, I feel a new compassion towards her, and I feel kind of like I should forgive her or I should be nice to her. Is that what you're saying? And I'd be like, no. If someone's being abusive to you, get away. Do everything in your power to get away from them. You deserve that. You do not ever deserve to be abused, regardless of the reason. Even if you understand, or I'm proposing that your abuser went through abuse themselves and that's why they're doing that, that in no way justifies what's happening and in no way means that you somehow have to, I don't know, see them in a positive light. No, get away from them. That's what I do. I'm an expert on this. I will detect people like this in my personal life and I'll try to make it work, but past a certain threshold, I'm gone. And I feel bad about that, but that's what I do because I'll try to make it work and and I end up being harmed tremendously. And then I get out. So everyone deserves to get away from an abusive person, even if we can see the abuser as sympathetic and as having viable psychological reasons as to why they're doing that. But by no means does that mean you're supposed to stick around. No. All right. This next series were comments on Patreon, and I am going to read those now. I'm not going to read their names because I never know if people want to remain anonymous in that situation because it is often behind that paywall. But so I'll just label them all as Patreon members. And this first Patreon member was attacking me or criticizing me harshly, very harshly, for the things that I was saying. And I think this person was pro Amber Heard and provided a lot of Reddit threads that they wanted me to look at that were, hundreds of people on Reddit were attacking me and saying that I was awful and harmful and unethical. And, it was one of those situations. So they were directing me to that Reddit thread and then they say, I think your videos are doing more damage to many more of your deserving listeners than you realize, which, and I've already been over, that's completely mortifying to me. Even if it's misplaced, the fact that some longtime listeners feel harmed by me is just awful, truly. And I guess the only kind of justification I can say for taking that risk is I guess I felt through this whole thing that there's a lot of good that I can do. But I don't know if it justifies that risk that I took. Another Patreon member was commenting on the same thread and said, I do not have words to express the sadness and disappointment your coverage of this trial has caused me. Nothing about your perspective or choices feels safe. Sadly, it was quite a repeat lesson for me of knowing your profession is not safe, kind, one to be trusted, one of insight or compassion. I am so grateful a Patreon member posted their Reddit thread where over 200 have upvoted their support of this view. Yeah, it's just more pain for me and I guess pain for you, which is awful. Another Patreon member also commented and said, I respectfully disagree. I have been on those Reddit boards. I have watched the borderline personality disorder subreddit refuse to post Amber Heard content, and I've seen the borderline personality disorder loved ones sub feel heard because of the trial. This podcast is by far the most objective source I've found online that explains both sides. Don't you remember halfway through when Kirk shifted to saying we should consider taking Amber at her word? There was also room for Johnny Depp being an abuser. That Reddit post alludes to not going to therapy again because of Kirk. How is that not textbook catastrophizing and black and white thinking? Yeah, well, thanks for saying that. I am mortified that anyone would not go to therapy because of me. Again, just like, that's probably even the worst thing anyone could ever say to me, right? It's one thing to say you're harmful. It's another thing to prevent someone from going to therapy, to prevent someone from seeking the help that they deserve. If I could say one thing to those people, I would say there are plenty of therapists that also probably think I'm an idiot. So find one of them, because they would probably agree with you that I'm an idiot or something. You deserve to get the help that you need. So I hope that you would never not go to therapy because some rando on YouTube said something. Another Patreon member was disagreeing as well to the criticism against me and says, I'm not sure if we're watching the same videos because I haven't gotten any of that from anything Dr. Honda said. Like you, I'm also a survivor. In my opinion, your comment sounds a bit threatening near the end. I remember being threatened countless times, and it was never a good feeling. Please try to remember every time threats were made against you and how they affected you. I don't mean any disrespect to you. Yeah, so thanks for sticking up for me. I don't want anyone to feel compelled to fight my battle, but I do absolutely appreciate when people just provide a respectful rebuttal. Just be like, hey, I don't mean to be respectful, or I hear where you're coming from, but that's not how I took it. Something like that. I think, one, makes me feel better, and two, your voice deserves to be heard, and three, might help other people a little bit to be like, oh, well, maybe I should. People can turn away from me. They could cancel their membership. They could, walk away and think I'm an idiot. But at the very least, I wouldn't want them to think that therapy is bad or think that they shouldn't go to therapy because of me or something. So maybe offering those kinds of kind rebuttals would help people a little bit. I don't know. Patron Annabelle had some nice things to say that I won't mention because it feels indulgent going on. Apparently, I've been struggling with symptoms of a personality disorder, but never had the language, tools, or skills to express my experience or to get help. You changed that. The kindness, compassion, and expertise you share so generously altered the course of my life, as well as the lives of my family members. I'm now in therapy through BetterHelp, where I found a lovely therapist. As long as I am able, I'll continue to support your work. Keep your chins up, and thank you again for all you do. Well, thank you. Are you saying I have multiple chins? Narcissism. Anyway, but yeah, glad that you got help, and BetterHelp is one of the options. It's a convenient option, but there are other options, obviously, and you found a lovely therapist. That's great. And in terms of, some people will say, like, I can't afford to be a patron member. I hope that's okay. And yeah, absolutely. I can relate. There have been vast swaths of my life where paying $5 a month was not affordable to me. So I get that. I 100% do. When you download my podcast on your phone app or you click on YouTube, you are contributing to, the fractions of the pennies that come my way, and it adds up. So you are contributing when you're watching, for sure. And honestly, that was always my hope from the very beginning. Before Patreon came along, I was podcasting 7 years before Patreon was invented. And I remember thinking, well, okay, I have like 1,000 people that are listening to the podcast, or I don't know, whatever number. And I thought, if everyone just gave $1 a month, then I could make a living doing this or something like that. I mean, not on that salary in all likelihood, but in Seattle anyway. But something along those lines. And I remember thinking, I wish there was a way that everyone could just, every time they listened, it's like someone singing a song on the corner and you put a nickel in their cup. And it's just a little contribution. If everyone gives a little bit, then I can actually dedicate more time to this sort of thing. And so with clicking and the ads that you have to sit through or listen to, those are essentially not a nickel. It would be nice, but it's a small fraction of a penny, but it adds up. And so you are doing that for me. And while I'm on that topic, just think about it. Like all of you right now are literally paying my bills so that I can do this. You bought the camera. I'm talking, well, actually my wife bought that camera. Did y'all know I'm using her camera? She has a lot of cameras, not a lot of cameras, but some. This whole time I've been using her camera. This microphone I bought a long time ago. But, this computer screen I probably bought at some point during the podcast. And so you bought the computer screen. What else did you buy? A lot of things. Probably this shirt. I bought this shirt in the past couple of years. You bought this shirt. You paid for my haircut, which is, I don't know. Anyway, so you did that. Because you did that, that means I didn't have to do other things to have them pay for those things so that I could do this right now. All right. Listener from Bermuda, she says, I'm a longtime follower of your YouTube channel, and I am devastated to hear about your experience with online backlash. I wanted to share how much of a positive impact your work has had on my life. I was so ashamed to find that I could relate a lot to Amber Heard's behavior. In my current relationship, I have become the abusive partner. I have punched walls, slammed doors, screamed, stomped out of rooms, and used painful details of my partner's personal life, like daggers against him, during our fights. While the whole world seemed to be painting Amber as a psychotic demon spawn, I stayed quiet because I was so ashamed to admit that I could understand where she was coming from, and I just assumed that I was also evil, the way that they were talking about Amber Heard. Your compassionate and balanced approach to her testimony made me realize that there are some safe spaces where I can confront this part of myself and work on it to keep him safe and make our life together better. I don't think I ever would have had the courage to admit this to anyone else if I hadn't seen your analysis of the trial. I started online therapy at the beginning of June with a clear goal of addressing this issue, and my partner is willing to start couples therapy. So I want to thank you. Your safety and well-being should be of the utmost priority, and I really hope that you and your family stay well. Well, listener from Bermuda, I mean, my goodness. You know, it's one thing, which is glorious, when someone who has borderline or histrionic or is an abuse survivor themselves listens to my stuff and feels validated and gets the help that they need. But it's a whole other thing. Well, let's just say it's equally as wonderful and gratifying when someone who is abusive watches my stuff and is able to admit to themselves that they also are being abusive, but that doesn't mean that they're an evil human being, and thus can accept their behavior and look at it, admit to it, and get the help that they need such that they don't do that anymore, so that they don't harm their partner and they can actually get their needs met. I mean, my goodness. I want to hug this email. I just want to, I feel like I want to cry. Hold it together, Kirk. All right, well, let's end it there, and then I'll pick up later in another episode. And everyone out there, please take care of yourself because you deserve it. You really, really do.